Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rosemary Crosse from NUI Galway. And we're here to speak this afternoon about a piece of research we conducted in the UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre on lone parents and labour market activation for that group. Dr. Millar secured funding from the Department of Social Protection and the Irish Research Council to conduct the research, and I was the researcher on that project. So just to kind of, before we start, just to say that the kind of views and the research that we're presenting here are our views, the author's own views, and we're solely responsible for the views, and these cannot be attributed to the department in any way. We have to say that. Yeah. Okay, so that's just a picture of the report there. We'll keep moving. Okay, so basically, the research was funded by the Irish Research Council and the Department of Social Protection, and the aim of it was to investigate best practice and international approaches to labour market and activation for lone parents. So basically, the approaches to labour market activation that had the potential to create good outcomes for lone parents and their children in terms of achieving both financial independence and well-being. Okay, sorry now. Okay, so just to bring it through, I suppose the approach to the research, the approach that we took encompassed two parts. So there was a major part around the kind of theoretical element, which was a literature review, quite a substantial literature review for this type of research, looking at international evidence from countries all over the world in terms of what they've done in relation to labour market activation for lone parents. So, and then the empirical part was to conduct interviews with stakeholders and with organisations and those who work with lone parents on the ground to really know the issues that are facing lone parents. So we conducted 20 interviews, as well as the policy actors or the civil servants that were involved in the introduction of this policy. So just to give you an idea of say the literature part and how broad the study was, these were the records of the literature that we searched, and we ended up with 504 studies from all over the world that we included in the report. You can see that an awful lot of records were excluded. They were excluded really because they weren't applicable maybe to the specific cohort of lone parents, or the studies were too old really to be relevant to this particular research. So what did the literature tell us? Well, it's interesting that a lot of what you're going to hear now will not be new to anybody sitting in this room, and also it's very reflective of what both Richard and Stuart and the other speakers spoke about earlier on today. So the literature tells us that there are kind of three main approaches to labour market activation for lone parents worldwide. The introduction of strict work requirements, or participation in particular activation programs, changes to welfare payments and taxes to improve incentives to work, and the provision of childcare services or subsidies. But how these elements are kind of played out together in any particular country varies from country to country. So basically there's no kind of one best practice really. So what did the findings tell us then? Well, it's difficult to kind of isolate any one particular effect that's good at producing outcomes for lone parents in cases of activation. And really, it's a combination of measures that is required to make an impact. International evidence suggests that a well-developed system of employment supports and reform of institutions involved in giving employment assistance and social protection, and they're definitely essential elements of any activation strategy. In Ireland, as we know, there are a number of different types of supports available to lone parents who are transitioning from welfare to work. So you have your kind of social protection income supports, assistance in finding employment through the Intrio centres, you have in-work benefits such as FIS, you have education and training supports, you have employment supports, and you have certain childcare supports as well. But the interviews that we conducted with those who work directly with lone parents and know the issues that lone parents face, highlighted a significant concern about the capacity of Ireland's employment supports to deal with the volume of lone parents being activated, because it was over a 3-year period, as you know, and to deliver effective activation for this group. But it's also, so that's what we do know, but it's important also to know what we do not know. So this kind of lends itself to what's required for future research, if you like. There's a significant gap in evaluation on the impact of these policies, particularly on children. On the poverty rates, internationally, we see that some of the approaches have had an impact on poverty rates, but not in all cases, and more often than not by very much. The time costs of parental employment need to be investigated. They're high, and so the quality of childcare is very, very important. And as we know, childcare differs depending on the age of the child. So these type of impacts are what's really going to be needed for future research. Older children, for example, receiving less parental time, that was a concern for a lot of the stakeholders in the interviews. Less supervision for some might mean kind of more independence or greater independence. For others, it might mean greater risk-taking behaviour. But overall, I think the clear messages to come out of the research, and this is not new, this is in mostly every research report ever written in relation to lone parents, is that there's a lack of recognition of the challenges faced by lone parents, of the reality of their everyday lives. For instance, the welfare system as we have it in Ireland was developed really post-war and developed with 2 parents in mind, the constitutional family, if you like, the family based on marriage. And absorbing lone parent families into that system is a continuation of that kind of ideology, if you like, and highlighting the lack of recognition of the challenges faced by lone parents. The capacity, as we all know, of the one-parent family to work and care cannot be equated to that of 2 parents, as they only have half the time resources available to them that couple parents have. And also another issue which Louise will be speaking about later on, but which was acknowledged in the research, is that deafening silence in relation to the other parent, or the role of the other parent in the responsibility of caring for the child, care and financially providing for children. The lack of legislation on maintenance in relation to the job seekers allowance is an example of that, which I'll leave to Louise to kind of pick up on that later on. So ultimately, what the study found is that overall, it's a package of supports that is the most effective way to assist lone parents into sustainable employment, to ensure that income levels are adequate and to lift lone parents out of families. So this, I think it's important to note that the policy wasn't just about it wasn't supposed to be just about putting lone parents back to employment or into employment. It was about lifting lone parents out of poverty and increasing the well-being of the family. So it's a package of supports. That's the best way to achieve this. And overall, attention needs to be paid to whether jobs are lone parent ready, rather than making lone parents job ready. An integrated, coherent policy needs to be directed towards alleviating the work-family bind in lone parent households. And I'm just going to pass you over, sorry, the microphone, just going to pass you over to Michelle now, who's going to kind of go through the recommendations of the report. Thank you.
Okay, so based on what we found then, we were asked to come up with a number of recommendations to the department in relation to the international evidence and what could be or could not be applied to Ireland. So the first thing we suggested, and it's an issue that was raised by Spark, was the fact that a lot of lone parents were going to be financially worse off because of these reforms, particularly those who were already in employment. We found no evidence anywhere in any other country that this actually happened, with the exception of America, where there's a time limit on how long you can collect benefits. So that was the first thing we recommended. But what we also felt was that this represented a radical shift in how social protection dealt with lone parents in Ireland, and that this needs very careful monitoring, particularly with the involvement of private sector organisations dealing with the employment supports. That needs to be monitored. In other countries, there's been widespread what we call parking and creaming of job seekers, in terms of those who will be difficult to assist into employment are parked, and those who are job ready will be creamed. But also, this is the first time that sanctions are being brought in for lone parents, and very careful attention needs to be paid to that and the financial consequences. So there is a job of monitoring this situation that needs to take place. In line with the Rowlingson and Millar in terms of what activation policy looks like, we broke down the recommendations then in that regard. So in terms of pre-employment supports, given the educational characteristics of many of the recipients of the one-parent family payment, there needs to be an education and training first approach to increase the capacity to attain and sustain paid employment. Right down to, even as Hazel was talking about earlier on, getting ready for an interview and getting your CV ready. Job preparation programs are required with more education and training options. For example, many lone parents who left school without their Leaving Cert can't do a PLC because they don't have a Leaving Cert. So it's about being more flexibility with the educational options available to them. But then there are other lone parents with very high levels of education who aren't connecting to the labour market. So again, we need to look at what barriers are there in relation to their educational progression, funding for progressive studies. One of the big things we found in all the countries was the importance of what are called the caseworkers, or that individual you meet in the Intrio office. And in countries where activation has been successful, particularly in the UK in the past, not in the present, has been largely put down to continuous contact with caseworkers, or what were called personal advisors. And what the literature is telling us is that the role of the caseworker in facilitating the progression of a lone parent is fundamental, both before a job and once in employment. And that requires training. Trained caseworkers have been shown to assist well with job searching, training, education, looking for childcare, doing better off financial calculations in terms of making work pay. But this does require specific training, and specific training that makes caseworkers aware of the challenges faced by lone parents in their everyday lives. The research shows that those caseworkers who take an empathetic approach to dealing with lone parents and build a relationship based on mutual respect and trust are much more effective in their role. So this would be one of the main recommendations in relation to the Intrio office. And then when lone parents are in employment, they will require ongoing contact and support from a caseworker. The international evidence suggests the importance of, again, monitoring these private companies and sanctions. And we strongly recommend that both be monitored by the Department of Social Protection, particularly as we know from international evidence, it is the most vulnerable who are liable to be sanctioned and have their payments reduced. Financial supports, these are key. Activation can lead to in-work poverty. And as such, lone parents who are in work will require financial support. And this is what has reduced poverty for this group of lone parent households. These financial supports, such as family income supplement and the back to work family dividend, can ensure, if they work properly, income adequacy for lone parents to make work pay. But in-work benefits like FIS need to be flexible and need to be responsive to the lived labour market experiences of parents. Things like a 19 hours requirement for somebody on a 0-hour contract means that FIS doesn't work for many families. So FIS has many shortcomings. The 19 hours criteria, proving with a letter from your employer that you have hours to work. Also, from the research we discovered there's a lack of consistency in terms of documents required, and also for many the fact that their employer is aware that they're in receipt of a social protection payment, which doesn't happen in other countries. So we need to very clearly look at what is happening with lone parents in relation to the take-up of FIS, and particularly then for many when the back-to-work family dividend ends after the second year. Childcare supports, again, a significant factor. In this country, cost is the big issue. But again, the literature shows that state subsidies can have a very significant positive effect on the use of childcare. So we recommend that there be increases in subsidies. Again, childcare availability is an issue that needs to be addressed, and flexibility in the type of provision that's there. But this would, of course, require funding and investment on the part of the state. And a big issue, as mentioned by Rosemary, that came up in the interviews, but is also a burgeoning area in other countries, is teenagers. Managing teenagers and the challenges faced at this stage of development can be difficult, and parental support is still needed, and in many instances is needed more than it was when the child was younger. Worries over child safety and security were to the forefront of the concerns raised about the activation policy. But a lot of the stakeholders felt that this could be resolved by greater collaboration between state and community actors such as schools, about being more creative about the type of after-school care we have for our teenagers. So, just some final thoughts. The importance of effective employment supports can't be underestimated. It would appear that a package of supports is the most effective way to assist lone parents into sustainable employment and ensure that income levels are sufficient to lift them out of poverty, if this is what the policy aims to do. But an appreciation of the challenges faced by lone parents and an alternative policy that centres less on conditionality would remove the barriers to employment, provide more training and education, and the quality of work available to lone parents needs urgent consideration. One more final thought in relation to the policy. Lone parents who have transitioned to employment since the changes came about, only 6.9% of them are in receipt of FIS, which is the main in-work benefit to make work pay. If we look at the 25,000 recipients of the one-parent family payment who exited in 2015, 54% were moved to job seekers transition, 10% to job seekers allowance, and 32% to FIS. So the Indicon report then tells us that 53% of lone parents surveyed are worse off financially since the reforms, and 63% of those who are in employment cannot afford 3 or more items on the deprivation list. So they clearly haven't been removed from poverty. Thank you.